Okay. The title for today's talk is going to be Frogs and Fire Drills. And if you didn't see the beginning, we had a picture of a frog, and then we had a famous uh, poem of Basho, the guy who he didn't invent haiku, but he sort of put it on the map, and everybody knows Basho, and most people know his famous haiku. And it was in Japanese, so unless you speak Japanese, you won't get it. So um, I'm going to give you my rendering of this famous haiku, probably the most famous haiku. If you put in most famous haiku, this one will probably come up. But the renderings of this are very different. Well, here's my rendering of it. But first, we're going to have to do a visualization here. So you shut your eyes and I'll give you the visualization to prepare you for this dynamite haiku. So if you can shut your eyes, just relax in the dark screen, and then on the dark screen, visualize a pond. Just you're sitting on the edge of the pond. It's a lovely pond, and uh, it's totally calm. And it's so calm. Like I have the pond behind Loose Leaf Hollow here, and sometimes it's so calm it'll reflect the clouds in the sky. It'll reflect the trees that surround it. So let's visualize that pond with whatever it reflects in it, and let's just take a moment to just stare into the mirrored surface of the pond. You're in your own movie theater. This is visualization. So visualize that beautiful pond, perfect temperature, and everything is just the way you like it. And maybe you're looking at the clouds go over as they're reflected in the pond. Maybe a few maples, oaks, evergreens, and they're all reflected in the pond. So just hold that image as I read the haiku. Ancient mirrored pond, bullfrog leaps. Plop! That's it. That's it. It's the famous one. Ancient mirrored pond, bullfrog leaps. Plop. You'll find some few different interpretations of that, but that's my rendering of it. Ancient mirrored pond, bullfrog leaps. Plop. Matsuo Basho. Okay. I started writing this. I had just a couple other retreatants last weekend, and one of them had like about three or four huge bullfrogs plop into her pond at the same time, and so she was here for a retreat, and this started to come out in one of the writings. So I got the poem's just called Plop. By the way, it'll be in tomorrow's email, but this is roughly how it goes. The luminous heart is the ancient pond, reflecting everything so clearly. Then plop. The luminous heart is the ancient pond, reflecting everything so clearly. Then plop. Visions of your Viking cruise down the Rhine, visions of you aging on some golden pond somewhere. Go plop down the drain in the blink of an eye. Talk about ripples in still water. Immense truth in such few words. Poems are subversive, but haiku are like ninjas. They slip silently under the barbed wire of our ego defenses, just when we need them most. Immense truth in just 15 syllables. Here in English, it was just 6 words. Ancient mirrored pond, bullfrog leaps, plop. Immense truth in such few words. Poems are subversive, But haiku are like ninjas. They slip silently under the barbed wire of our ego defenses just when we need them most, especially when your life goes plop. You've got all your ducks in a row. You've sat down with your financial planner, and then something shows up on an x ray, or a dear friend dies unexpectedly in her sleep. Plop. Not just ripples now, but a tsunami swamps your heart. Do you have a spiritual practice that enables you to sit by that pond and wait for it to settle? Do you have a spiritual practice that enables you to sit by that pond and wait for it to settle? I sure hope so. The luminous heart records everything, every frog, every ripple, your whole life, perhaps several lives, all of it, the good, the bad, and the unwanted. The luminous heart records everything. Every frog, every ripple, your whole life, perhaps several lives, all of it, the good, the bad, and the unwanted. And it will always give you a clear picture of the next step. If you can sit still enough and listen deeply enough until the muddy water settles and the mirror returns to whisper its silent, sunlit wisdom. So, you hearing this now, make it a habit to show up daily and be faithful to the stillness, no matter what. And in that silence, listen to the real morning news. Practice like your hair's on fire, because one day it will be. And then you just might know what to do, no matter how many friggin' frogs are leaping all around you, no matter how many times your best laid plans go plop. Yeah, that came out of working with a dear sister who, like I said, like a dozen bullfrogs jumping in at the same time. It was a, and it's very common when a tsunami of sorts uh, happens, that you're afraid to sit. In her case, she was. She gave up sitting because it's just you're just afraid. You're traumatized and you're afraid to sit, and that's quite understandable. But it's actually why we practice for day in, day out, week in, week out, year in, year out, so that we know by that time when your life goes plop that you have something you can do, and you can sit down with them. And she did sit down last weekend a number of times with me, and she righted the ship. She could hear the next step. It's like this. I just shook it up when we started yesterday. It's this uh, jar there it's sort of clear now because I shook it up last night, but sort of like the pond, and then it gets all shook up. I mean, you can't see your way to what next step to take when your vision's like this, but this will settle down. The pond will settle down. Your heart will bring back this mirror clarity, and then you will know the next step. But who has the patience to do that? Who has the practice to do that? That's one of the things that I'm glad I've been working on. We saw a little 8-minute video of Pema Chodron this morning that she made on her 80th birthday party, her 80th birthday, and she gave a little 8-minute talk. You can find it on YouTube. Just put in Pema 80th birthday, and it was great because she's 80, and this was a few years ago, and she's talking about what it's like to be 80. She says, maybe I'll be 90. You know, she says 10 years. That's not very much, but she's so happy that she said, I'm going to talk about something really cheery here, death. on my birthday, and uh, and then she talked about how she's been training for years now, preparing for not just the time when this whole enterprise shuts down, but almost that there's life and death in every breath. And so it was quite an interesting teaching. Yeah, you can check it out. But uh, the second, the fire drill poem it's in your, if you happen to have the Cave of the Heart, it's in there. And I had, I grew up in Chicago in the 50s, and there were no fire drills at schools in those days until there's a Catholic school in the south side of Chicago called Our Lady of Angels, and it caught on fire, and a bunch of kids died because they panicked. They didn't know how to get out, and kids, even flaming kids, jumping out of the windows. I mean, it was sort of like an early glimpse of what happened on 9/11, and it was awful. And after that, I mean, the government, it was sort of like pronto. We had a government at the time that could respond to things. We were so divided. Pronto, they passed a law that you had to have fire drills. You had to teach people what to do when things went crazy. And so they wouldn't die. And so kids used to always moan about the fire drills. When I did them in high school and then junior high. But I said, look, I said, it seems boring, and it's a lot of times like getting up in the morning and meditating. It seems boring, and blah blah blah. But I said, you practice so that when things go crazy, you'll know what to do. So this is 2000 fire drills, which when I wrote this poem a couple of years ago, I'd figured that I probably sat 20,000. I figured I probably sat 20,000 times since I began in 1972. So this is 20,000 fire drills. This is what you do when your hair is on fire. Uh, uh, a black Tibetan teacher who's still on death row uh, to this day, and he's a great teacher. Pema mentored him, and so maybe he teaches on Zoom now, but he said, you don't begin practice till your ass is on fire. That's what you see brings people to it. Yeah, it doesn't matter why. But this is the poem. Practicing contemplation day after day for decades is like practicing 20,000 fire drills. So you won't panic when the pure light comes in a flash, because you practice day after day how to walk through the wall of fire into the unified field of the white rose, day after day, all the way home to the pattern that connects. There's a lot of illusions in that. Uh, so you won't panic when the pure light comes in a flash. The Tibetans who have studied death and dying, and then they posit what happens next in their Tibetan Book of the Dead. They say at the moment of death, there's a flash of the pure light, and if you're ready for it, and if you relax into it, presto, you're out of this whole thing. You can go into what the Catholics call the communion of saints. Then you can go that way, or you can choose to come back into the next life as a bodhisattva, like the Dalai Lama's been 14 times around. But you can miss it entirely if you're not ready for it. One Joko Beck, who's a great Zen master, she said, you can't avoid paradise. You can only avoid recognizing it. And so that flash that they say comes, it can be terrifying too, or you can just miss it. But if you've been preparing for it all your life, you could relax into it. The whole idea of preparing for death, it's in the Christian tradition too, from the Middle Ages. It was called memento mori. Remember, you're going to die someday, so let's get ready for this. And it's interesting because people who talk about, they get a diagnosis and they've got 6 months to live. Okay, plop, big plop. Oh, for some people, not for all people, but for some people, every moment becomes precious. Then, you know, every moment you got 6 months to live. Everybody looks different, and drinking a cup of coffee is precious. Uh, Taking a walk now when you know, hey, you got maybe 30 or 40 of these left. Maybe you don't even have that many, because none of us really ever know. Like uh, my friend Nancy, who just went to sleep and did not wake up. That's a possibility, and so uh, it should be precious now. This moment should be precious, and it is. It is, and so you don't panic when the pure light comes in a flash. You're able to relax first of all because you practice day after day. And then this next image, how to walk through the wall of fire, that's an image from Dante's Divine Comedy, which is another, talk about a tour of consciousness, a poetic tour of consciousness. It's the great one, written in 1300 thereabouts. Uh, and uh, Dante wants to reconnect with Beatrice, his beloved, who he happened to be married to somebody else, and so did she, and didn't work out. She died, and so he wants to go to heaven to see her. He's sure she's in heaven, and he's got to go through hell, nine circles of hell, and then the seven-storied mountain of purgatory before he could get into paradise to meet Beatrice. And Virgil, the poet, he's dead, but he's his shade, but he can take him through this because he's been there. He's gone through hell and into purgatory, and but when he gets to the end of the seven-story mountain, where Merton took the title for his first autobiography from that, he thought he had been in hell in the early part of his life, and then his time in the monastery was this purgation that was going to clear your vision so you could recognize um, paradise. And but when he gets to the end of the mountain, he's got to go into paradise. Virgil says, "I can't go there. You got to go. You got to go alone." And furthermore, Dante had to walk through a wall of fire to get into the entrance, which is the last purgation. Purgation means you clear your vision. That's why the Muslims, before they go into the mosque for prayers, they they wash their hands and take their shoes off, and they wash their face and all that. It's a ritual that say, all right, I want to clear my vision so I could actually recognize the sacred. See, yeah. So at some point you have day after day you practice how to walk through the wall of fire, and this. My friend last week was walking through a wall of fire just to be able to sit with all the feelings, to be able to sit with your life in all occasions, and especially when the most unwanted thing shows up. Do you have practice in that? You need to practice in that. I'm encouraging to practice in that. That's one of the things that we're training. And we sit, we'll sit in a little bit. We'll sit for 20 minutes. That's good. It's good to do that every day if you can, to build up this ability. And think of it like a fire drill, that when you really need it, you'll be able to do it. And then the pond will clear up. It will whisper to you. All we need to know is the next step. Uh, the pond never gives me the whole journey. That would be sort of boring. We think we want it, but it would really be like watching the movie over, reruns. Even if it's a good movie, you can't watch it forever. But so then, this is my experience. It doesn't. It tells me the next step, and that's good. And then, because step by step you make it. Nobody really has the whole vision. We think we do. Going to retire on Golden Pond, and then plop. That's not what's happening at all. So you walk through the wall of fire, then into the unified field. Because you really, if you can relax into what happens at that moment of death, or at this moment of death in our life, inhale, exhale. That's birth and death in a single breath. Our life started with an inhale, the first inhale when we were born, and then it will end on. Nobody ends on it. Sogyal Rinpoche said nobody ends on the in breath. It's just the nature of a whole life between that first in breath and that last. So every breath, we're in that cycle of birth and death. See, and so be great to wake up to the unified field now. You know, it changes you. It changes you. When I walked up to the head of the road, I can't even make my whole walk now. I'm meeting with the knee surgeon next week. Hopefully, I'll get some news about when they can actually work on this left knee. But walked up there with one of my sisters this morning, and we had a good talk. But when we got to the top of the hill, I recited the Rumi poem that I think it was the first poem I ever recited 3 years ago. Because when I get up to the top of the road, you can see this big field down below, and I said, I'm going to recite this Rumi poem. I said, out beyond ideas of wrongdoing and right doing, there's a field. I'll meet you there. When the soul lies down in that grass, the world is too full to talk about. Ideas, language, even the phrase each other doesn't make any sense when we're together in this field, this unified field of love. Rumi knew about the unified field in the 13th century. Einstein tried to prove it mathematically, never got there, but he intuited it. That's why he was a mystic at the end of his life, like Rumi. He knew it existed. He just couldn't get it into numbers. We still can't. No need to. That's like trying to use the numbers in the brain to do what it's not cut out to do. This unified field of love that is what's beyond the wall of fire, and you don't have to wait to have a physical discorporation to do it. It's asking for you right now. How precious is this moment to you? Yeah, because the unified field it's the pattern that connects everything. That feeling of being. Do you feel connected or sort of separate? Yeah, that's exactly what we're going to talk about when we talk about the spectrum of consciousness. From the consciousness that always feels separate and disconnected, looking at the world and life, or the consciousness on the other end of the spectrum that um, is totally connected in a kind of unified field with everybody and everything, every particle. That is sort of the span of consciousness. We'll be taking a poetic tour of that next Saturday. Yeah. So all to just say, keep showing up, not just here, but really do try to get some time every day to just do what we're about to do now, which is going into the silence, into the unified field. Okay. All right. Well, I think that's good enough for today.